folks, Ariel over here. I wanted to do a little garden update this morning. I don't believe I've done a single video on what's growing in the garden yet this year because I've just been really busy. If you're new, welcome. We live a little over 6,000 feet in elevation in the Wyoming mountains in a high little valley, higher mountains behind us, and it's cold here most of the time. We get about 8 months of winter. We can get snows and freezes fairly regularly through the summer. And right at the moment, we've been having a blistering heat wave. It's been over 90 degrees, which I've lived in Wyoming for many summers that never reached 80 ever once. So anyway, it's been hot, but it can be cold. So if you want more of the history of what I plant every year, I've kind of, over time and experimenting, figured out what will reliably grow well for us in this climate. It's pretty much things that are a winter garden in most places. That's what I can grow in the summer. The little white things, if you're wondering what they are frost covers that roll up and down over these hoops when it's not 94 degrees, so that I can protect the plants from a little extra frost. We often do get nights to 31, 28, 27, stuff like that all through the summer. Anyway, so overall the garden is doing really well this year. This bed is all potatoes. There are a couple varieties. You can probably kind of see how the colors change. And the far back bed that you can probably see behind me is also all potatoes. They are huge. These ones beside me are big, and the one variety growing over at that end is almost reaching the hoops, which is the tallest potato plants I've ever seen. Now they're just starting to bloom. There's some little potato flowers. Actually fall off if you bump them too much. Starting. Haven't tried to dig any new potatoes, but usually when they start to bloom on the surface, they're forming the tubers underneath. So probably before too long here, we can start to dig in there and not harvest all the potatoes yet. You wait till the plants fully die back for that, but maybe get some new baby potatoes. I have just a few left. We had a great harvest of potatoes last year. The last few left are pretty shrivelly, and probably make one more batch of mashed potatoes out of those, and then they'll be used up. They're not real good for a whole lot else, as wrinkly as they are. And then we'll be on to this year's crop of potatoes, but that means that harvest of potatoes held us through the entire year until there's more to harvest, so that is a wonderful thing. So really happy with how they are doing, and we planted Yukon Golds. That's my favorite, but they're not the best storing potatoes. Some Red Skins, I just like the color. Some Kennebecks, and the new one I've tried this year that I haven't done in the past is called Huckleberry Gold. It's supposed to be very similar to a Yukon Gold. They've got some purple flowers down here, except the outer skin is purple. It's not a purple flesh the whole way through. I have grown some like that in the past. But it's a creamy yellow flesh with a purple skin, so it'll be fun to see how those do. Figured I'd try them since I really like the Yukon Golds. You can kind of see from both the height and the leaf color, these places where potato varieties switch. And down here, these are Huckleberry Gold potatoes. I think their purple flowers are really cool. At this end, like I said, you can see the potato plants are almost approaching the top of the hoops. The beds are only 8 inches high, but these potato tops are nearly up to my hips, which is quite tall. I've never had them get that big for us before. This bed over here has onions down the front. They're just starting to make bulbs. The middle all has various green beans. Some are actually green, some are purple green beans, and some are yellow. But they're all, fresh eating beans. They're just starting to bloom. First few flowers opening, so we should be getting some beans here soon. Some summers, if we get a lot of hard freezes, the beans just don't do that well, even with the frost covers protecting them. They kind of just sit there and aren't very productive. But if we have a warm spell like this that continues, I think we're going to get a lot of beans. In the back behind them here, I have some little teeny cucumber vines. They're growing, but they're not very big yet, so we'll see if we get any cucumbers. I love cucumbers, but we don't really have a climate that they like either. But I like to plant some in case it ends up being a summer where they will grow, because I do really like them. And there's a few broccolis at the far other end. Coming back, this bed is mostly beets. Got candy striped beets, choiga right here. Then I've got golden beets, and then I've got red beets, and in between I just have some more onions because we use a lot of onions in a year. So that's kind of what's growing here. Now looking the other way and coming this direction for the beets, I have several varieties of zucchinis and summer squash growing in here. They're another thing that, depending on the year, doesn't always do well, but with the heat this year, they are. And we've got a bunch of little teeny, I haven't actually seen a flower open, but we've got a bunch of little teeny squash about the size of my pinky finger starting, and some are yellow, some are green, and so on, but we do really enjoy eating a bunch of those. So hopefully, in not too long, we'll actually have some of them to eat. The sugar snap peas here are making sugar snap peas. I know this variety will get a little fatter and juicier, but some are big enough to eat. And the ground beside them is a little bit bare because we did have radishes and we've eaten almost all of them. At this point, they're one of the first things that gets ready. But these are some of the best looking zucchinis we've ever had in the garden. Back here, this is not the best looking. This is my lettuce bed. I plant quite a few varieties of lettuce, and normally I have way more lettuce than we can possibly eat. And for some reason this year, almost none of them germinated. This patch did, but some of the others didn't at all. Same seeds I've been using for years. Usually have far more lettuce plants, like I said, than I want, and for some reason this year it's really, really sparse. Seems like every year there's some plant that does something like that, so that's why you plant a variety of things. But anyway, we do have some lettuce coming. We've got some pretty good heads there. Might make some BLTs later on, but the lettuce bed looks a little pathetic compared to normal. And behind me here, this was a strawberry bed. I now have strawberries growing many, many other places on the property, so I don't really need this bed because they don't typically need the frost covers, because the plants themselves are actually quite hardy. So I've been gradually transplanting them out of here to other places, like down our raspberry bed and stuff, which is newly planted this year. I want them to be kind of a ground cover under the raspberries. But then it got way too blistering hot to continue transplanting. I did not think the plants would survive. So I got about half the bed done, and the rest is just waiting for it to cool off. We have been picking a few strawberries, but if you can see why that bed's, you know, half full, half empty. And once I get them all out of there, that will go to just being another garden bed I can grow these other veggies in, because now we have strawberries everywhere. And right in front of here is more potatoes, doing very well. This bed has our hull peas, the ones that you shell the peas out of. They're my favorite, that's why I plant mostly them. And they are starting to, they've got little peas hanging on here. They're not quite ready to pick, but they're blooming prolifically, doing well. And in front of them are carrots on both edges. That was the thing, other than lettuce, usually no matter how sparing I try to be with my carrot seeds, I get way more carrots than we can ever eat. And this year a bunch didn't germinate, and then some are germinating really slow. It's kind of weird. Some of the carrots are like this tall, and then as I was weeding through here the other day, I could see there's like ones that look like they were just planted and just starting, and what that seed's been doing this whole time, I'm not sure. But once again, every year there's something that seems to act like that, and usually carrots and lettuce are two things that do really great, and this year they're both a little weird. But we do have carrots growing, and it'll probably still be plenty for what we need. And shortly we should be picking peas. This side I've got purple cabbage. We use that to mostly make lots of Danish Christmas cabbage, which we love eating all year long, and you can find recipes for how we do that. It's doing really well. It's, you know, pretty much can't see the ground between the outside leaves. It's just starting to make little heads. They're just that big in there. And the purple cabbage always is a little slower to start heading than the green. Coming down this way, I have green cabbage. And they have got heads going this big already, so we shall see how big they get. I will probably start harvesting some, just so we can use some fresh, but they will get a lot bigger, I believe. Several people had asked what our cabbage variety was last year when we had that one green head that weighed over 30 pounds. And I wasn't sure, because I always get my cabbage starts from a local greenhouse here that just labels them cabbage. Anyway, you can see some little bug holes in there, but they are doing really well. I did ask them this year what variety they plant, and they're called Golden Cross. And so that's what these are, since we don't have a greenhouse to start our own. But we'll see if anybody makes it to being a 30-pound cabbage this year. And the far end has a little bit of broccoli. So I come over to the next bed. This whole bed is garlic. This is kind of the permanent garlic bed. Most of the other things we rotate, so they're in different beds every year. Garlic seems to be one thing that really enjoys being in the exact same spot every year. So this is the 4th year, I believe, of this being the garlic bed. And we have Music and Chestnut Red. That's the 2 garlic varieties. They're all hard necks. They already produce scapes that we broke off and used. That's the flour on the garlic, because we don't want them putting all their energy into that. Plus we eat the scapes. We want them putting their energy into their bulbs. So they're looking quite good. They were planted last fall. Just starting to see the bottom tips of leaves dry back. Usually when about half the leaves are brown is when you harvest them, so it's going to be a bit before we harvest them yet, but they're growing well. We use a lot of garlic, so that's good to see. And at the end of that cabbage bed, and at the end of this first bed we started in, there is some broccoli. We've picked most of the first heads. I see I've got one there that needs picking, and they're making more little sprouts off to the side, so we'll usually are able to harvest a continual broccoli harvest right up until the snow flies. So overall, I'm very happy with the growth. It remains to be seen, of course, what happens in the rest of the year. If you notice, these leaves are a little tattered. We have had some flea beetles that like brassicas again this year. They have not, is that 2 years ago? We had an explosion of like billions of them that ate every brassica plant down to just a skeleton of its stalks in like 2 days. We've thankfully had nothing like that. I believe I mentioned last year I'd added some beneficial nematodes to the soil that parasitize the flea beetle larvae as they're growing in the ground. That seems to be helpful. They aren't gone because they're definitely nibbling the edges of some leaves, but they've kind of kept it to nibbling the edges of the leaves and have not destroyed the cabbage and broccoli and so on crops. So that's been huge. I have a whole video I want to put together on controlling bugs with other bugs, because we've done that with several things and it seems to be working. But yeah, so not everything looks perfect. The tattery edges aren't the best, but for the most part, things seem to be thriving, and that's always exciting. We have harvested the asparagus patches just off to the side there, so we've harvested asparagus so far this year. We're starting to pick some strawberries. We've had broccoli, had radishes, some sugar snap peas, about to start cutting some cabbage heads. I could shortly start pulling some onions, but I just used the last of my last year's onions, and then so that crop held really well. I did buy a couple onions last time I was at the grocery store because these aren't big yet and I could use them, but I know I want this whole volume of onions to be big, so I'll probably use a couple grocery store ones till these grow just a little more. So really close to lasted through the whole year. And we do actually still have some garlic left, which is good because these aren't quite ready to harvest, and we use quite a bit of garlic. So all of those crops that we tend to get gobs of have stored very well. We do also still have some Christmas cabbage left. Last year the purple cabbage was the most spectacular purple cabbage harvest I'd ever had, so I canned plenty, hoping that if it wasn't quite such a spectacular cabbage year this year, we'd have some leftovers. And we do have a little bit, not much, but a little bit of sauerkraut left. So those are kind of the, maybe I might have one container of peas in the freezer still, or I might have used the last one last time I made something with peas. But those are the main crops that we grow in bulk, and last year's volumes, you can go back and look at our harvest from last year. This garden space produced just shy of 1,000 pounds of food for us last year. And no, we're not selling that at a produce market or anything. We certainly share some with friends when we are harvesting things, but for the most part, we're just growing food for ourselves. So all those crops kind of held out till about now when the new crops are coming in, and then some we've never grown enough of to preserve through the whole year. We just eat our broccoli fresh. If the green beans are real productive this year, I might be able to freeze some. I was able to freeze just a couple bags last year, but I haven't. Maybe with the strawberries out of there, I'll plant more. Hi, Button. Hi. You want to come say hi? Your feet are a little wet from walking through wet grass. Yeah. I see Spooky's coming too. Spooky's one of our, she's grown now, but one of our kittens that likes to be petted but doesn't actually like to come close to you. It's her name. So she comes near and doesn't usually come over to be petted. I don't know why. She's been here her whole life. She's just a little fraidy cat. Anyway, that's how the crops are working out. We are optimistic. You never know what will happen with the weather, but that this will, we're just starting harvesting now, but kind of from now until the snow flies again, whatever that is, September, October-ish normally is the first snowfalls for the year here. We get to eat lots and lots of fresh things. And then our main heavy crops that I just listed are the things that we, have enough of to eat through the winter. But these are the things that usually do well here and are productive, and so they are crops we like. We plant things, people ask, what should they plant? Well, plant things you want to eat. That's the first thing. Then if there's things you want to eat, like I love tomatoes, I love butternut squash. They won't grow here in this climate without some serious protection, which is why I don't plant them. So while I would love to eat more squash and sweet potatoes, say, we eat more white potatoes of different varieties because that's what grows here. So we kind of make some choices like that. We do grow things we enjoy, but we also choose to enjoy the things that will produce a lot of food in our area. But like I said at the start, this is pretty much a lot of this stuff, probably not the green beans and zucchinis maybe, but everything else is what you could grow as a winter garden in a lot of climates, or if they're very warm climates, or like even where I grew up in Pennsylvania in a zone 7, a lot of these crops would be the early spring crops. Then you'd grow your whole summer garden, and if you wanted, you could pretty much regrow all this stuff again in the fall. So we don't get that here because of our snow and cold climate, but if you're in one of those areas and you want to consider this in this same kind of space, depending on how warm you are, you could probably grow these things twice in the spring or fall, or all these same things in the dead of winter. But I always like to see people growing as much of their own food as possible. It's always the freshest, tastes the best, is the most nutrient rich, and is just fun. Gardening is by nature a little bit of an optimistic, I think you have to be a little optimistic to be a gardener. Spooky, do you want petted? No. Okay, you don't. I know. An optimistic person, because everything you're doing is always for the future. You're planting this and you're hoping it will grow. You see it growing and you're hoping it will produce fruit. We've got behind the potato bed, kind of outside of the garden, we have a hollyhock bed now. I like hollyhocks, and they're one of Clay's favorite flowers, so we planted a bunch, but they just got planted this year, and they're a biennial, which means they grow part of a plant one year, and then they usually flower the second year. So we probably won't see a hollyhock flower this year. So that's optimistic that we are hoping they will survive, and we will start getting flowers from them next year, and so on. So anyway, gardening is just fun. I think people are naturally, almost everyone who gardens finds it relaxing. So whether you have, this garden space is about 600 square feet of actual bed space, not counting the paths, whether you have something like that, or just one planter, like our planters down by the shop are doing phenomenally, or whatever, I highly encourage everyone to try growing something. It's just a lot of fun. And if you're curious about the haze you're seeing in the sky, yes, that is smoke. We don't have any fires burning here super close to us, but it seems that every summer now we get lots of smoke from the various West Coast fires that blankets the area for much of the summer. It's been pretty thick the last few days, so that's what that is. There are a few actual clouds today. It'd be lovely to get rain. We've only had one real rainstorm since last fall, but I don't know if we'll actually get anything. But mostly that's smoke, in case you're wondering, making the mountains look kind of pretty and hazy and misty, but I'd rather they be clear. This is our outside edge of the garden bed that I mentioned we planted hollyhocks in. But since I know they won't bloom this year, we have a whole line of sunflowers. They're looking happy, and in the background I threw in various herbs, ruby buckwheat, some California poppies, and a bunch of radishes, which are blooming mostly to help just fertilize and nourish the soil, plus the bees like the flowers. We're not even harvesting those radishes, just letting them go to seed there and decompose again, so that soil will become richer. But that will eventually kind of be a hollyhock wall, sheltering the garden from this side. Kind of like the strawberry and currant bed shelters the garden on this side. I think gardening is always a learning process. I've been gardening in one form or another for much of my life, having helped my parents with the garden as a very, very small child. And now pretty much my whole adult life I've had a garden of some size everywhere I've ever lived, even in apartments in town. It was just really little then. But I think you could have multiple lifetimes and not learn nearly everything there is to know about plants and soil chemistry and such. But what I did want to share is that the two things I've learned in more recent years that I think have made the biggest difference in us having a really productive garden are balancing your soil minerals. That was especially important for us at this place because our soil is so crazy out of balance. Now, everybody's place where you live will be different, but here we specifically had extremely high calcium levels and extreme deficiencies of some other things, which threw the pH off, which made it very difficult for plants to even use nutrients that were there. So running a soil test, which I've done videos on that and how to do that and stuff through Logan Labs, was super helpful. We did a few soil mineral amendments, and some of them are little. Some of it was like across all these garden beds, 600 square foot, the math came out to you need like 1 pound of this. Some was like, you need 3 tablespoons of this. But the growth from the year we hadn't done that, when almost nothing grew in our first garden year, to having adjusted the soil, it's not perfect, but to where the plants are clearly much, much happier, that is huge. I highly, highly recommend doing a soil test. And the other thing is, I've also done videos talking about this, doing the foliar feeding with our rotty weed water. Whatever weeds you're pulling, thistles, dandelions if you don't like them, I like dandelions, carrot tops, potato peels, any of that plant and vegetable material, let it just rot somewhere probably outside of your house, because it does stink, in a bucket of preferably rainwater, and then use that resulting kind of green, sludgy, slightly stinky, fermenty weed water, and we put like a cup in a sprayer with, just like a hand carry sprayer with a wand, and dilute it with water and use that to foliar feed. I've done it about every 10 days so far this spring on all the veggie plants, all the flowers, all the fruit trees, all of that stuff that we're growing. And because the minerals in that stuff, because it's breaking down plant matter, are already in the form that, from what I read, that the plants can use, and they can absorb nutrients through their leaves, much like we can absorb things through our skin as well as through their roots. So doing that, and I'd say those two things, making sure our minerals in the soil are decent, and then using the foliar feeding, has dramatically increased the yields we get and the health of our plants overall, and so on. Now, good microbes are also key. Every year we put, compost on top of the beds. I've got videos showing that. Just usually after I'm done harvesting in the fall, I just kind of mulch the top of the bed. That's the soil you're seeing is not actually bare soil. I add, somewhere between 1 inch to 1/2 inch of compost on the surface every year, and it just mulches the soil underneath and adds lots of microbes, lots more nutrients, lots of humus to the soil, and so on. So those are the things that I largely credit having a pretty productive garden, considering our climate and limitations here with. And of course then it's always a blessing if we get the weather that is most helpful. It's a blessing if we do get rain, and so on. Those things are all out of my control, but of the things that I have some control over, I highly encourage doing a soil mineral analysis, and you don't have to do it every year or anything. I did it the first year, made some adjustments, and did one more test to be sure we got it close, which it said we did. We made a couple more little adjustments to some minerals after that, but I don't plan to really run anymore. It gave me an idea of what we have here on the property and what we're working with. Doing the foliar feeding regularly, and compost, make compost. Keep it up. You can probably see the compost pins out back there. I've talked before about how I do that. They're real quick to put together with usually free pallets and some zip ties, which also means you can disassemble them and move them wherever. And I don't turn the compost or anything. You can get compost faster doing that. You can get actually better compost by just piling it, from what I read when people study this stuff with microscopes. You actually get a better quality compost just piling it up and letting it sit and wait. So I pile up and wait, and then a year later, it's beautiful broken down stuff that goes on our garden beds. And usually there's some bigger chunks of stuff that aren't fully broken down, but it's it's clean, it's beautiful, it's soft. It doesn't really stick to your hands like mud, which is what the clay, like in the paths here, the soil all by itself on this property does. So those things are all huge, and they're all fairly inexpensive. You can make your rotted weed water for free. You can make compost generally for free. Use leaves, grass clipping, potato tops, any kitchen scraps, anything you've got, that cardboard, anything you've got that was once organic material will break down. And the only thing that does cost a little money is to run a soil test, but that's not very expensive. I'm trying to think what it was, 30 something dollars maybe. And again, that's kind of a one-time expense. And then depending what mineral imbalances you may or may not have, you may have to add a few minerals. So that can be a small cost. But the other two things are basically free, compost and foliar feeding. But for us, where our soil was so out of balance, doing the mineral thing also was huge. That's my advice if you're starting to garden. That's how our garden is looking. Nothing's perfect, probably never will be. I'm sure we'll have more failures and hopefully more successes, but that's the things I've learned after lots and lots of years of gardening. Thanks for spending your valuable time with us.
I hope you learned something interesting and useful.
Or found something beautiful here.